Do you have to have consent when filing an adoption in Alabama? And the answer to that question is yes. You have to have consent from both parents. But there's two ways to get consent. There's express consent and there's implied consent. My name is Sam Bone. I'm a Gadsden, Alabama adoption attorney, and I help people like you get their adoption put through without complicated legal forms. I handle all the paperwork for you. So let's go back to consent and adoption. The first way is express consent. How do we get express consent? Express consent is exactly how it sounds, which is the parents literally sign a consent form in your office that shows that they consent and agree to the adoption. In the consent form, there's specific things that we have to put. We'll go over the details of that in another video, but that's express consent. The next is implied consent, and there is 5 different ways to have implied consent. One difference I want to point out between express and implied consent is with express consent, they have a period of time that they can withdraw their consent. With implied consent, you cannot withdraw your consent. So let's go over the 5 different ones. Number 1 is abandonment of the adoptee. Abandonment is the failure of the father with reasonable knowledge of the pregnancy to offer financial and or emotional support for a period of 6 months prior to the birth. That's the first way to prove abandonment of the adoptee or implied consent. Next, leaving the adoptee, the child, without provision for his or her identification for a period of 30 days. That's the second way to get implied consent. 3, knowingly leaving the adoptee with others without provision for support and without communication, or not otherwise maintaining a significant parental relationship with an adoptee for a period of 6 months. Okay, there's a lot to unpack here. So it's leaving the child with others without provision for support. So that means not paying any child support, not giving any diapers, nothing, and without communication. So those 2 things: no communication, no support for 6 months, or not maintaining a significant parental relationship with the adoptee for a period of 6 months. So that's a 2-part way of applied consent there. One of the mistakes I see a lot of people make when filing an adoption is not waiting that full 6 months to file. They get too excited and file it too early. You've got to have that full 6 months if that's the implied consent prong that you're going to use. You've got to wait that 6 months before you file. Number 4 is receiving notification of the adoption and failing to answer within 30 days. So once they get notification of the adoption, they've got 30 days to answer. If they don't answer, then it's like a default judgment in civil cases. And the last one is failing to comply with Section 2610C1, and that section is dealing with the Putative father statute, which means you've got to file notice that you believe that you're the biological father. This is if you're not married, within 30 days after the birth of the child. And I've represented fathers in this situation where they actually saw the child at the birth. They actually saw, helped take care of the child while the child was in the hospital. And then 30 days later, they still had never filed that putative father registry, and they found out later that the mother had put the child up for adoption. It's too late. Nothing the father can do due to that implied consent. So that's the 2 ways you can get consent here in Alabama, and that's required. If there's an issue as to whether there is consent, the court will move it to juvenile court to determine whether to terminate the rights or not. So the next step is for you to set up an appointment with me, and let's go over, hey, do we have that consent to determine, is it time for you to file your adoption? Yeah, my name's Sam Bone. I'm a Gadsden, Alabama adoption attorney. I have over 200 Google reviews on Google. In 2015, I was named a top 40 lawyer under the age of 40. In 2021, Superlawyers named me a rising star. And I would love to help you with your adoption.